Father abandons his wife and daughter upon discovering her second pregnancy. Years later, she inherits the entire family fortune. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Emily sat at the dining table in their modest home, her hands trembling as she held the ultrasound photo. "We're having another baby, Richard," she said, her voice filled with cautious joy. Across from her, Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Another," he muttered, his tone flat. "We can barely afford the one we have." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped for excitement, for support, but instead, she saw panic flash across his face. "We'll manage," she said, reaching for his hand. "We always have." Richard pulled away, standing abruptly. "You don't understand, Emily. I can't. No, I won't do this. Another child means more expenses, more stress. I'm already drowning." The argument escalated. Emily pleaded with him, reminding him of their vows and their love for their daughter, Lily, who was barely 2 years old. But Richard was unmoved. That night, he packed a bag and left. The next morning, Emily found a note on the kitchen counter. "I can't do this anymore. I need space. Take care of yourself and Lily." Tears blurred her vision as she realized the enormity of what had happened. Richard wasn't just leaving for a night or two. He was abandoning them entirely. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emily was thrust into survival mode, juggling a part-time job as a receptionist and caring for Lily while navigating her pregnancy. The absence of Richard's income was a crushing blow, but Emily was determined to provide for her children, even if it meant exhausting herself. One afternoon, she received a call from Richard's mother, Margaret. Unlike Richard, Margaret had always been kind to Emily, often stepping in to help with Lily. "I heard what happened," Margaret said softly. "I'm so sorry, dear." Emily broke down on the phone, pouring out her fears and frustrations. Margaret listened patiently and offered to help in any way she could. She promised to send money to cover some of Emily's expenses, a lifeline Emily desperately needed. For the next year, Margaret stayed true to her word, visiting frequently and sending checks to help with the bills. Emily was grateful, but she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness every time Margaret arrived without Richard. One rainy evening, Emily received a call that changed everything. Margaret and her husband, Harold, had been in a car accident. Harold had died on the scene, and Margaret was in critical condition. Emily rushed to the hospital, where she sat by Margaret's bedside, holding her frail hand. Margaret opened her eyes briefly and whispered, "Emily, take care of the children. There's something for them." Before Emily could ask what she meant, Margaret's hand went limp. The monitor flatlined, and the room was filled with the sound of nurses rushing in. Emily stood there in shock, her heart breaking for the woman who had become a surrogate mother to her. The funeral was a somber affair. Richard attended but kept his distance, avoiding Emily and Lily entirely. Emily noticed the tension between Richard and his siblings as they argued about the family estate. Harold and Margaret had died without leaving a will, and now their wealth was entangled in legal disputes. Emily returned home, grieving not only for Margaret but for the financial support that had kept her afloat. The little savings she had managed to gather would barely last another month. 2 years later, Emily had rebuilt her life in a small but cozy apartment. Her second child, Sophie, was now a lively toddler, and Lily was thriving in school. Despite the hardships, Emily felt proud of the life she had carved out for her daughters. One afternoon, a certified letter arrived in the mail. The return address was from a law firm she didn't recognize. Curious and apprehensive, Emily opened it to find a letter from Margaret's attorney. "Dear Mrs. Emily Hayes, it has come to our attention that a trust fund was established by the late Harold and Margaret Hayes for their grandchildren. This fund was kept confidential at their request, but we are now obligated to inform you of its existence. The fund is substantial and has been designated exclusively for the benefit of Lily and Sophie Hayes. Please contact our office to discuss the details and next steps." Emily's hands shook as she reread the letter. Her mind raced with questions. Why hadn't Richard mentioned this? Did he even know? And what had Margaret meant when she said, "There's something for them"? Emily contacted the law firm immediately, setting up a meeting to learn more about the trust. As she hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger revelation. Word of the trust fund spread quickly. Within weeks, Richard resurfaced, claiming he wanted to rebuild their family. Emily was skeptical but decided to let him spend time with the girls under supervision. One evening, she overheard a phone call Richard had carelessly left on speaker. "If we play this right," he said to someone, "we can get control of that trust fund. I just need her to trust me again." Emily's blood ran cold. It wasn't love or remorse that had brought Richard back. It was greed. With newfound determination, Emily began to dig deeper into the terms of the trust fund. She was determined to protect her daughters from a man who had already abandoned them once. Emily's shock quickly turned into resolve. She had fought too hard to let Richard manipulate his way back into their lives. The next morning, she visited the law firm managing the trust. The attorney, an elderly man with kind eyes named Mr. Whitaker, welcomed her into his office. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm glad you came in. The trust fund your late in-laws created is quite significant, and it comes with specific conditions to ensure its integrity." Emily leaned forward. "What kind of conditions?" Mr. Whitaker pulled out a thick document and flipped to a marked page. "The trust is solely for the benefit of your daughters, Lily and Sophie. As the primary guardian, you have limited access to manage funds for their education, healthcare, and basic needs. However, there's a clause preventing their father, Richard Hayes, from having any control or influence over the trust. This was explicitly included by Margaret and Harold after certain events." Emily's heart raced. "What events?" Mr. Whitaker hesitated, studying her expression before answering. "It appears your ex-husband attempted to convince his parents to revoke the trust before their passing. He claimed it was unnecessary and even suggested transferring the funds directly to him. Margaret and Harold were deeply disappointed and insisted on these safeguards to protect the money." Emily sat back stunned. She had suspected Richard's return was disingenuous, but this revelation confirmed it. Her in-laws, despite their flaws, had seen through him and taken steps to ensure their grandchildren's future was secure. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker," Emily said, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes to honor Margaret and Harold's wishes." Back at home, Emily decided to confront Richard. She couldn't allow him to linger in their lives under the guise of reconciliation. That evening, as he sat on her couch, pretending to read a story to Sophie, Emily crossed her arms and stood in the doorway. "Cut the act, Richard," she said sharply. He looked up, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I spoke with the attorney managing the trust. I know what you tried to do. You didn't come back for the girls. You came back for the money." Richard's face hardened. For a moment, he didn't even bother to deny it. "You don't understand," he said, his tone cold. "That money belongs to this family. I'm their father, and I have every right to it." Emily laughed bitterly. "You forfeited your rights the moment you walked out that door. Margaret and Harold saw through you, and so do I. You'll never touch a penny of that trust." Richard stood, his temper flaring. "You think you're better than me? You're just a receptionist who got lucky. Don't act like you don't need me." "I don't need you," Emily shot back. "And neither do they." Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Emily sank into the chair, exhausted but relieved. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of control over her life. In the weeks that followed, Emily focused on building a better future for her daughters. With the trust fund as a safety net, she was able to enroll Lily in a prestigious school and secure therapy for Sophie, who had been struggling with anxiety. Emily also began taking online courses in interior design, a field she had always been passionate about but never had the chance to pursue. Then another letter arrived. This time, it was from a different law firm representing Richard. The contents were as infuriating as they were predictable. Richard was suing Emily for access to the trust fund, claiming he was entitled to manage it as the children's father. Emily's hands shook as she read the letter, but she refused to let fear take over. She contacted Mr. Whittaker, who assured her the trust's conditions were ironclad. Still, she knew this battle wouldn't be easy. Richard was relentless, and she needed to be prepared for whatever tactics he might use. The courtroom was tense on the day of the hearing. Richard arrived with his lawyer, a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. Emily sat quietly with her attorney, clutching a folder of documents that outlined Richard's abandonment and his attempt to undermine the trust. As the proceedings began, Richard's lawyer painted a picture of a devoted father who had been unfairly excluded from his children's lives. Emily fought the urge to roll her eyes as he spoke about Richard's sincere desire to provide for his daughters. When it was her turn to testify, Emily spoke calmly and confidently. She recounted the night Richard left, the years she spent struggling to provide for her daughters, and the support Margaret and Harold had given her. She presented text messages and emails that showed Richard's disinterest in their lives until the trust fund was revealed. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at Richard, whose confidence seemed to waver as Emily laid out her case. When the time came for a decision, the judge didn't hesitate. "Mr. Hayes, it's clear that your actions have been motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern for your children. The terms of the trust are clear, and I see no reason to alter them. The funds will remain under the management of Mrs. Hayes. Your request is denied." Emily exhaled, relief washing over her. Richard's face twisted with anger, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt truly free from his shadow. After the hearing, Emily decided to take a portion of the trust to start her own business. She rented a small studio and began designing interiors for clients in her community. Her natural talent and hard work paid off, and within a year, her business was thriving. Every time she looked at Lily and Sophie, she felt a surge of pride. They were happy, healthy, and growing up in a home filled with love and stability. The trust fund had given them a foundation, but it was Emily's determination that had built their future. She knew Margaret and Harold would have been proud. Years passed, and Emily's life flourished in ways she had never imagined. Her interior design business grew rapidly, gaining recognition for its unique blend of elegance and functionality. What started as a modest endeavor transformed into a sought-after brand, with Emily receiving invitations to collaborate on high-profile projects. She carefully managed her time to ensure her daughters, Lily and Sophie, always remained her priority. Lily, now a teenager, was excelling in school and dreaming of becoming an architect. Sophie, ever curious and full of energy, loved accompanying Emily to her design projects, often sketching her own ideas on scraps of paper. The girls thrived in the supportive, nurturing environment Emily had worked tirelessly to create. But Richard wasn't done trying to disrupt their lives. One crisp autumn morning, Emily received another letter from a law firm. It wasn't from Richard's attorneys this time. Instead, it was a formal notice informing her of a claim Richard had filed to contest the validity of the trust itself. He argued that it was unfairly established to exclude him and insisted on an audit of its finances. Emily's stomach churned as she read the letter, but she was no longer the scared, struggling woman Richard had abandoned all those years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and prepared to fight for what her daughters deserved. She immediately contacted Mr. Whittaker, who reassured her that the trust structure was solid. "This is a desperate move," he said calmly. "We'll handle it, but be prepared for him to drag this out." The legal battle stretched on for months, draining Emily's energy but not her resolve. She refused to let Richard bully her into submission. As the court dates loomed, she poured herself into her work and her family, finding solace in the life she had built. One evening, as Emily sat reviewing case documents, Lily approached her with an old photo album she had found in the attic. It contained pictures of Margaret and Harold with the girls as babies, along with handwritten notes Margaret had included. Emily's eyes welled up as she read the notes, each one brimming with love and hope for her granddaughters. One note, in particular, caught Emily's attention. "To my dear Lily and Sophie, this trust is our way of giving you the future you deserve. Always remember, strength and kindness will carry you further than wealth ever could." Your mother is the strongest person I know. Trust her, and you will never go wrong." Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Margaret and Harold had entrusted her with this responsibility, and she would not let them down. The final court hearing was a pivotal moment. Richard's lawyer argued vehemently that the trust unfairly excluded him and was based on personal grievances rather than legal fairness. Emily's attorney countered with evidence of Richard's neglect and attempts to manipulate the trust's creators. Then Emily was called to the stand. She spoke from the heart, recounting her journey from abandonment to independence. She described how Margaret and Harold had stepped in to support her and her daughters when Richard had walked away. She held nothing back, sharing the emotional and financial struggles she had endured and the immense relief the trust had provided. "Margaret and Harold didn't create this trust to punish their son," Emily said, her voice steady. "They created it to protect their granddaughters. Richard had every opportunity to be a part of their lives, but he chose to walk away. This trust isn't about him. It's about their future." The courtroom was silent as Emily stepped down. Richard avoided her gaze, his earlier bravado now replaced with unease. When the judge delivered the verdict, Emily felt as though the weight of the world had lifted from her shoulders. The trust was upheld, and Richard's claim was dismissed. The judge issued a stern warning to Richard, emphasizing the importance of acting in the best interests of his children rather than his own. As the courtroom emptied, Richard approached Emily, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that resembled regret. "You've always been stubborn," he said, his tone bitter. "I guess you won this round." Emily looked him in the eye, her voice firm but calm. "This wasn't about winning or losing, Richard. This was about protecting our daughters from the choices you made. I'll always put them first. You should try doing the same." Richard left without another word, and Emily walked out of the courthouse with her head held high. In the months that followed, Emily used the trust's resources to expand her business further, creating opportunities for other single mothers who were rebuilding their lives. She established a foundation in Margaret and Harold's memory, dedicated to supporting families facing hardships. The foundation's first major project was funding scholarships for young women pursuing careers in design and architecture, inspired by Lily's growing passion. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Lily shared her latest project idea: designing a community center for children in underprivileged neighborhoods. Sophie chimed in with her own ideas, her excitement infectious. Emily listened with pride, marveling at the bright, compassionate young women her daughters were becoming. Looking out the window at the setting sun, Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had tested her in ways she never expected, but she had emerged stronger. The trust fund had been a lifeline, but it was her resilience, love, and determination that had truly shaped their future. And as she watched her daughters laugh and dream about the lives they would one day build, Emily knew she had created something far greater than wealth. She had created a legacy of strength and love that would endure for generations. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.